All right, well, let's get started. We are doing the topic of let's play fair. So even if we have young little ones at home, if they are even at the age of being able to express themselves, it is amazing, isn't it, that all of a sudden something will happen and they will say, "That's not fair," right? They didn't even have to be taught. It is amazing. Children are keenly aware of others' wrongdoings, and especially if it happens to them, right? So if you have preschoolers, you might be at the park, and you've brought all the toys, right? And you have this little one come up behind your child, grab the shovel and the bucket, and off he goes. And what does your child do? He turns around and says, "Mama, that is not fair," right? So upset. They know. And then, if you sit long enough at the park, you're also going to see maybe a child that is impatient, and he's going to shove another child down the slide because that child's not going fast enough, right? And down the slide, that child goes. And then, another one, you might see kids lined up for the swing, and all of a sudden one shoves their way in front of the other, and he says, "Me first," which is another term, right, that they didn't have to be taught, that they will say, and they will push their way right up to the front. So that goes deeper. The term, "that's not fair," goes much deeper than playing the board game, doesn't it? "That's not fair" actually expresses injustice that someone is doing to another human being. So if you have school-age kids, now they're getting a little bit older, what's the first thing you hear from your little girl when she comes home from school? You hear, "Mama, they won't let me play with them," right? All of a sudden, those cliques form. The popular kids all get into one little clique. The rest of the girls, right, and it happens with guys too, end up spending the rest of their life trying to get into these cliques that really don't matter. And they go off into life feeling that they will never be enough, right? Or feeling insignificant. And that's just not fair. Why do we as a people treat one another this way? What about the bully in the school nowadays? This has become a huge issue, a major problem that administration is not dealing with. They just won't deal with behaviors anymore. And this bully is allowed to go on and, terrorize his victims with his anger and his hate and eventually his violence. And we know the degree of that, how far that can go, right? We all like the idea of playing fair. It sits really well with us. So what is the problem? Why is it we are not playing fair as a culture with others? Why are we practicing so much unkindness? It's nuts, right? The Bible gives us a little insight into this, why we as a people act so unloving. And the Bible says, "The heart is deceitful above all things." Isn't that a great scripture to start the morning with? Sorry about that. It'll get better, I promise. The heart is deceitful. First, it's going to get worse. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Wow. Who can understand it? So this is a psalmist that is writing this, and he's wondering, he's probably experienced something that has caused him to say, what is going on with this? Who can understand this? Well, let's see if we can understand it a little better. What exactly is it that makes the heart sick? Point number 1 on your outline, let's at least try to understand the human heart. So we're not talking about the physical heart, right? We have a physical heart. It pumps blood and oxygen to our body. It keeps us alive. It's an incredible gift from God, right? We wouldn't be alive if we didn't have it. But instead, this morning, we're going to talk about the spiritual heart. So the spiritual heart includes the mind, which is what houses our thoughts and our ideas. The spiritual heart also houses our will. And so it is where our purpose comes from, right? So it is our purpose for life. We can think about that. That's our will producing that. But even more so, it's our purpose in the moment, right? I want that cookie. So I am going to purpose to have that cookie, right? That's my downfall right there. So you can tell I'm going to use that one. And so our mind, our will, and it houses our emotions. So, our joy, our depression, our excitement, our anger, all our different emotions come from the conscience, from the spiritual heart. And the spiritual heart also contains the conscience. Jumped ahead. And you might even think of the conscience, this is the way I like to think about it, as a moral warehouse. And the moral warehouse is almost completely empty, although there are a few little packages on the shelf. And those packages were given to us by God at conception. And they are the knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, justice and injustice. This is why we don't have to teach our children that that's not fair, right? It's in their hearts. They know it. That warehouse has to be guarded because that is the very mechanism that God has given us to protect us from engaging in evil. When we cooperate with God by training the heart with God's principles, God's standards, and I know Kelly talked a lot about this last week, so I think good thing we're following up on this. We are ensuring that God's revelation, the knowledge that he's placed in our heart, is increasing in right knowledge if we're using his principles. It produces right thinking, and then, of course, out of right thinking comes right behaviors, right? It's not we are what we eat, is it? It's we are what we think. So the thoughts have to be trained. In a sense, we are continuing to stock the shelves in the warehouse with the most exceptional product, which is God's word. When we train our kids in God's standard, it will have an enormous effect on their conscience. So they will end up increasing in wisdom. It'll promote harmony with God's precepts. So as they start to learn God's precepts, it increases. They start to understand it. It sits well with them, and they will continue to learn God's precepts. They will agree with it. And as a result, in the relationships with people around us, right, we will start to love others in a more intimate way, in a better way. And that's the good news, right? The bad news is the heart is also born with an enemy. And that enemy is called sin. And sin causes the heart to harden towards God's initial work, right? So when we fail to train the heart in God's precepts and we leave the heart to itself, the heart becomes harder and harder and harder. And eventually the work that God did is no longer even recognized by the human being. And we see that happening in our world, right? We see the depravity sometimes of the things that are happening around us, and that's a result of hardened hearts. So we have to acknowledge that sin is mankind's most significant problem. And just as we ran through some typical sins with the little ones, we have to think about the typical sins that we're dealing with as adults, right? And women, I'm going to start right off the bat with gossip, right? Because that's kind of it is our sweet spot. We've hardened our hearts towards the idea of always thinking kindly of the other person, and we engage in gossip tearing others down. That's a sin. We lie or we avoid the truth, right? That's a sin. We fight and we quarrel. All we have to do is think about our husbands and know that we will fight and quarrel with our husbands, the man that we gave our life to, right? And that's a sin, and it's a sin when we won't forgive. So we have to consider all the kinds of sins in our lives. There's many more. Those are just a few. To simplify the definition of sin, we can say that sin is pride. It's the act of putting ourselves above others. And refusing to sin is therefore humility, right? That's honoring people above ourselves. So when we're sinning, we are rejecting the act of humility. We are choosing to act in pride. So I've been around long enough, as you can see with my white hair up here, I've been around long enough to see that things have increased, behaviors have increased. The problem of sin has, I will say, increased over the last 50 years because what used to be a taboo, which was acting in pride in the, 50 years ago, that was not looked at as a good thing. Today, we are encouraged to be prideful. We are encouraged to assert ourselves. And that does not mean that the heart was any better back then. It was still sick. The heart was still sick. The heart still sinned. You still had people acting out. But in today's society, we are elevating self. We are elevating our own opinion about what is good and what is wrong, and so it becomes fluid. So you can have a conversation with somebody, and what they think is wrong, you don't think is wrong, or what you think is wrong, they don't think is wrong, right? We're no longer in agreement. So today we are more apt to pridefully demand our own way, and we will push to get it, and that will be encouraged. By God's standard, selfishness is sin, and that's what selfishness is when we push to get what we want. So 50 years ago, when society did desire to live harmoniously, and we do today as well. That's the desire. But back in the day, there was actually posted everywhere, there was an agreement in society that the golden rule should be respected. And the golden rule says, so whatever you wish that others will do for you, you do also for them. Makes sense, right? But today, that's not the standard, is it? And this used to be posted in markets and on buses, and you'd go to a restaurant and you'd see it hanging in the restaurant. It was society's norm to encourage one another to consider others, right, better than themselves. So if I want somebody to respect me, I have to make sure that I speak to them respectfully, right? And if I'm standing in a grocery line and I have one item and I'm in a hurry and I need to get out of there, and I'm standing behind a person with a basket full of groceries, I wish that that person would turn around, look at me and say, you go ahead, right? That means that if I'm in the grocery line holding the basket of groceries, the large basket of groceries, I better be the one to turn around and see who's behind me. I have to become more aware of considering others. So the golden rule is God's standard. If you've got a child at the park, right, and you see your child get up and he's heading towards another child and he's going to dump sand on the head of that child, what are you going to do? If you're living by the golden rule, You're going to jump up and you are going to go to your child and you're going to train him and tell him, honey, you need to pull back, right? You are not going to dump sand on that child's head because you would not want that child to dump sand on yours. Obviously, the golden rule was never practiced perfectly back in the day that I'm talking about, but it was at least expected by society. And there was this kind of a positive peer pressure that happened because everybody was on the same page. They agreed that the golden rule should be abided by. And so there was somewhat of a peer pressure. Doesn't mean that sin's not in the heart, but there was just more of a cooperation with people. So ladies, we would be very wise to choose this as a standard for our own society, right? But we also know we're not going to be able to change our society, we as individuals. It's a little disheartening when we think about that. But what I want you to realize is that you have a society. You live in a society within the four walls of your home. That is your society. And you can make a difference with those individuals, with the citizens in your society. You can train your children and help them to base their choices and base their decisions on that golden rule. So number 2 on the outline, let's adopt the golden rule. So some of you are thinking, I know, because when we do our class and I talk about things like this, I almost always get the question, I am not going to be the schmuck, right, that is trying to practice the golden rule when nobody around me is going to do that. I always hear that. It's a very honest response, I think. So let's look at a few things that might convince you to realize that practicing the golden rule, even if nobody around you is doing it, is still a good idea. So when you kindly treat others as you wish that they would treat you, it is going to increase your mental health. Individually, don't you all want better mental health in this day and age, right? Your feelings of empathy and compassion for others will grow. You'll start to care about people better. This type of kindness can increase the sense of connectivity with others. And so guess what it does? It decreases loneliness. Ladies, loneliness is epidemic in our culture today. Probably many of you here struggle with the feelings of loneliness. And it's because as a culture, we have been prepped, trained to think only of ourselves. And that is also where depression comes from. It's when we do not have our eyes outside of ourselves on others that we begin to experience these emotional issues in our life. And instead, by practicing the golden rule, it will enhance relationships. Your relationships will be better. And then generosity is another way of working with the golden rule. Generosity, right? And that can be contagious. Generosity actually activates the brain. It activates the feelings of pleasure in your brain. So the more that you are generous, the more you're going to feel that pleasure. It also releases a hormone called oxytocin, and that regulates social interactions and emotion. Isn't that amazing? I think that's amazing. And that is, again, the higher the oxytocin in your brain, the more apt you are to be generous to the people around you. And generosity comes in many forms. It's not just money. It's service, and it's thoughts, and it's words. To be generous in all of these ways. And if that's not enough to convince you, we have a creator. The creator of your child, your children, is incapable of acting out sinfully. Incapable. He is perfectly humble and the only one who is perfectly humble. That means that he has never practiced pride. meaning he is loving and kind to you, without boundaries, sacrificially, in all things. That's who God is. And the Bible tells us, which I love this, the Lord waits for you. He anticipates. He waits to be gracious to you. And therefore, he exalts himself. Well, that sounds prideful. But listen to this. He exalts himself to show you mercy. That's God's purpose. And again, he says, do you presume the riches of his kindness and his forbearance? That means long suffering. And his patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance. Repentance is simply a military term that means turn from, right? Just do an about face, turn from. And it means taking that attitude, that sinful attitude, and practicing instead an opposing attitude that reflects the character of a loving God, right? Are we schmucks if we love like God? Is that possible? I don't think so. We can trust God. He is perfect. He is perfect in his love. He is perfect in his kindness. He is the only one who knows how to perfectly instruct us for our benefit. He desires for us to turn from sin, which is going to result, and he promises this, in a life that goes well. That doesn't mean you're not going to have problems or illnesses or die one day. All of that is going to occur. That's just a part of living. But he has the ability to make life go well in the midst of our trials and our hardships. And your family, as your little society, can experience the blessings that come from practicing his standards. So let's get really practical here. There's a QR code on your paper. You don't have to use it right now. If you want to, you can. It is going to take you to a little form that is going to have you fill out your name and email. That means you're going to be subscribed to our newsletters, Training Hearts newsletters, which are newsletters just giving you basic parenting principles, parenting stories and ideas. But you can unsubscribe from that. I will not get my feelings hurt. Don't worry about it. I just want you to get to the PDFs that I have for you. So once you subscribe, it'll take you to another page where you'll be able to download these worksheets that I want you to be able to use with your kids when you go home. So the first PDF is going to be just an image of the golden rule with the golden rule written on it. And so take that, post it somewhere in your house, and make sure that the golden rule becomes something that you're thinking about on a regular basis. And then with that, there's going to be another PDF, and that PDF is going to have a few more Bible verses on kindness. All right? And then the next one is going to be a page that is a story, and it's called Mikey's Act of Kindness. And that'll be a story that you can sit down with your kids and read to them and help them to understand how an act of kindness can make a difference. Okay, so just those little PDFs, and hopefully that'll help you get started with your kids. And then number 3 on our outline, let's prepare our kids to live with the golden rule, okay? So letter A, who are the objects of their kindness? And we can play a little game with this. I used to do this with my kids all the time. Anytime they had anything to learn, it might have been math facts or spelling words or even something like this that was a little more behavioral. And I would just pull out the M&Ms. That's how I did it. And whoever answered the question would get a little M&M pushed towards them. We'd sit around the table. So whoever got the question would get an M&M. And you can ask your kids these questions, and eventually, as you ask them, you're going to find that they start to learn them well. So play the game until they have all the answers. And these are very basic. You could have come up with these yourself. So who are their objects of kindness? We have family members. So that's your inner circle, daddy, mommy, and siblings. We have outer circle, our extended family, grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles. We have peers, so that's kids that are within their same age, basically. And those are the kids on their block. They might be the kids at school or at church or at the park. Anywhere they run into other kids, they are objects of kindness, right? And then other adults, right? People who are in authority, parents, teachers, pastors, the people, anybody that you place over them as authority or who are just friends of yours, those are objects of kindness. And then pets are objects of kindness, and it's fun for kids with their pets to be able to participate in feeding them and taking care of them. And in that, they are learning how to care about others. I mean, I used to have rats, and I loved those little rats when I was a kid, and I used to raise them. They would have babies. I learned how to care for them, made sure they always had food. And when they had babies, my dad and I would go down to the pet store, and I would sell my baby rats to the pet store so that other people could also have rats. Little did I know they were feeding them to the snakes. I learned that later. I've never forgiven my father for that, but that's my problem. And then letter B, train the cookie test. And I love this. We used to do this as a family. And I would give, if the kids wanted a cookie, I would give 3 cookies on the plate. 2 of them would be amazing, good, kind of probably homemade, warm cookies. 1 would not be so good. 1 might be from the cabinet from one of the store-bought cookies. And I would give the plate to the child, and I would say, go offer cookies to your siblings, right? And that child would know that the good cookies were going to be taken, and the bad cookie was going to be left for him or her. Right? Doesn't sound fair, does it? But listen, this is such a good exercise in humility. And it's like a muscle. It has to be exercised. It has to be difficult in the beginning, and then they'll start to get good at it. And it was so funny the day that I had my kids do this, and off they go with the cookies, knowing they're going to have the crummy one. And the sibling takes the crummy one. And pretty soon that became the game. Who could have the crummy one first? So trust me when I say kids love these things. They want these opportunities to do good. And then letter C, ways of practicing honor and kindness daily. So these, again, are very simple ideas. You could come up with them yourself, but I'm just going to give you a foot up and let you think about them here. So it might be that the other one child gets to pick the story, and the other child has to go along with that, or a movie, right? Or the other one is allowed to go first in a game, and there's no fighting about that, right? We used to tell our kids, and again, it was a Bible principle, the first will be last and the last will be first. And we did that at Cornerstone as well, until the kids who were first in line started fighting for the back of the line. Then we had to figure something else out at that point. Funny how the little issue of sin can work its way even into the kindness. All right, so what about, and I love this because these little, letting the child go first or letting someone go first is so good. And that can start with the infants. And that's what I think is so cute. So you can have your baby sitting there in a high chair, and you can have maybe like little fishies there, little snacks, and train your baby to say one for mama, feed mama, and then one for self. And right away, you're giving your child, and you'll do this with toys with them. Have your child put the toys away in a basket, right? Babies can do that. And help mama with the mess. All these little acts that your little baby starts to do helps your child understand that they are not at the center of the world. When they think they're at the center of the world, they become very resentful and entitled. But when you give them the knowledge that they are just a part of your society and capable of being a help within that society, you give your kids a whole new purpose for living. All right, so let me see. And again, I love this because I used to work even with my little 3-year-olds. Like, when I did the cleaning, they did the cleaning. They'd have a little broom or they'd help scrub the toilet, and I've said this before, and it was a mess, and I always had to go in and clean up after them. But they did it, and they loved it, and they felt good that they had helped. So have your children help with the chores. Maybe have a couple times a week, one of the kids do another child's chore, right? Again, that's going to be difficult for them. They don't want to do that, but you're exercising the humility muscle. And then what about the words? So quickly, the words can get so negative with our kids. And so what you do is you give the one that's using the mean words a time of reflection. That is not a punishment. It's just a time for them to sit for 5 minutes and think about what they did and think about how they can change that behavior. And then after 5 minutes, you bring them back and you give them the opportunity to speak to their sibling in a civil manner, in a kind manner, right? So when your child is at the park, help them to not fight for the swing, but give the swing. It was interesting one day when I was I was administrating at Cornerstone, and so I would have friends that would take care of Natalie. She was little. And so they would sometimes bring her to me at lunchtime, which was a blessing. And then I would get to go have lunch with her, and I would take her to a park. So the park was very little, the park that we would go to, and it had just a swing set and a slide. And I was standing there, and I was on my Palm Pilot doing business while she was on the swing. Yes, I had a Palm Pilot. And all of a sudden, this woman walks up. She was a grandma, and she was with her grandchild. And she was on the opposite side of the circle. And I wasn't really paying much attention. And all of a sudden, I look up at her, and she's staring at me. And I'm like, what's going on? I look back at my Palm Pilot, and I look at her again. She says, how did you get her to do that? And I'm like, what? I totally missed it. What did she do? I'm thinking, Natalie, what did you do, girl? And the grandma says, she gave the swing to my granddaughter. My granddaughter walked up, she gave her the swing. How did you do that? And I was sitting there like, I didn't do it. And I said, she just wanted to share the swing. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. How'd you get her to do that? And so she comes marching across the sand to me, and I started to explain to her, well, we parent this way. We parent to help our children think about other people. And so when your daughter walked up and there was only one swing, it was her obligation to give that swing to the girl. And there's Natalie just pushing the girl in the swing. And the grandma goes, well, that is unbelievable. And I go, not really. I said, really, it can be easily trained. And I explained to her that we did a parenting class. And she looked at me and she goes, well, I'm telling my daughter about this. And I went, I'm thinking, oh, that's going to go real well. Mom's going to go home and go, you need to get into this parenting class, right? I can just imagine. And I talked to my husband, Mario, about it. I go, we will never see that, Mom, in our parenting class. Well, about a year later, I had a woman walk up to me in the parenting class, and she said, I just need to tell you something. She said, my mom came home from the park one day. And I went, what? and you listened to her? And she goes, oh, yeah, I listened to her. And she goes, I want this. And so she and her husband were plugged into the class. Well, about a year later, when it was time, her daughter ended up at Cornerstone. So that family, by Natalie's one act of kindness, and I'm not saying Natalie is perfect. That was a good day, right? We were working on it. But by that one act of kindness, she affected an entire family who ended up going through the school and learning that whole concept of how to live. And we always say to glorify God, to reflect God's character. And this is what I want you all to know. And that's why I tell this story. It is so incredible that you and your children can have that kind of powerful effect on other people. So we're not going to worry about making them do what we want them to do. We're just going to do in our own little society what we know is the right thing to do. And you will see the fruit of that eventually. Have your child speak to adults with respect, right? That doesn't happen nowadays. Have your child stop, look the adult in their eyes, and use titles. Mr. and Mrs., pastor, right? Whatever the title is. Have them use those titles of respect. Help them to honor adults by being obedient to them. Help your kids to understand obedience isn't just to stop you from doing the things you want to do. Obedience is for the sake of being kind to the people around you. Get their eyes off themselves and onto others. And consider allowing your kids to practice generosity, giving gifts. If your child's friend is responsible enough, and that's a judgment call, allow your child to offer his toy to that friend, maybe to take home for a couple days to play with it. That's sacrificial, isn't it? And it's trusting, and hopefully you can trust that child. And then they can bring it back in a couple days, right? That's really a good exercise for your kids. Or, I love this one. You will love it too. Have your child go through all their toys, because there are far too many in all of your homes, right? And they have to pick out 3 toys, and you do this like bi-weekly, and they have to give those 3 toys away to somebody that they want to. They're good toys. They're in good condition. These are not the junky things that are ready to go in the trash, right? We want this to be a sacrifice to them. And then they give them away. They give them to somebody that they know could use those toys. Or they give them to the Goodwill, right? And they go down with you, and they actually are the ones that hand those toys over. Have them use their own money to purchase a gift. And I know you're going, what money? Every child has at least a nickel, right? Every child has at least 25 cents. And so allow them to buy a little piece of gum or something, right? Something small. And then take it home. Help them to wrap that little gift. Help them to put a little bow on it. And then make sure that they pass that off to the person that they wanted to give it to. These are the exercises that are, remember, setting off the oxytocin in their brain. And again, back in the kitchen, have them help you make cookies and meals for people who are in need, people who need comfort, maybe mamas who just had a baby. And your child helps you, She helps you load everything into the car, or he, and you both drive over, and your child helps carry it into the house, right? They are a part of these gifts. Or maybe they write a sweet little message to somebody or color a picture. You help them get it into an envelope with a stamp, and you let them drop it in the mail. These are all very simple little things that are regularly, if you're using them, causing your child to think about others. And then you could sponsor a missionary family, or, they have those programs where you can adopt an orphan, and you put that little picture on the refrigerator, and then every month, even though you're doing it probably electronically, they give you a few cents that goes to supporting that child that is on the refrigerator. How wonderful is that for them, right? All kinds of ways that we can engage them in these acts of kindness. All this we are doing because we're helping them to think of others as we wish that they would think of us, right? It becomes our wonderful opportunity to increase the joy in our homes. Think about that. If you're living with a little society that is acting in kindness, this enlightens your children to be able to think beyond themselves. And committing to this is really going to radically change your family. It'll change your home. Helping your kids to learn how to resist the temptation to give in to the negativity that this world has to offer, and giving them a chance to live above those common discourtesies. I mean, that's so important. It'll allow your kids a way to live in this world where they are successfully able to bless the people around them. And ladies, in that, your children are going to be very blessed. So thank you very much for the time you've given me today, and I hope you have a wonderful time in your discussion. God bless you.